Bill Belichick forces the SEC to now play 9 conference games. Arch Manning having his first start as the starter now after being able to practice all preseason against Ohio State, against Julian Sand, another first-year starter. We got a lot to talk about. We're going to be breaking down all the big games in week 1. We're going to be reacting to all the big news and all the big games from week 0. So we got a very, very packed show. So definitely make sure to stay tuned. Coming up right now. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Anthony Balester YouTube channel. I am your host, Anthony Balester. As I stated before, we have a lot to get into. I mean, the SEC making changes now, where they're going to be playing more conference games. I'll be giving my opinion on that. We're also going to be talking about the Iowa State-Kansas State game in week 0, one of the best week 0 games we've had in a long time. We're also going to be talking about some of the biggest games coming up, including Texas and Ohio State. I'll give you my predictions and thoughts on that. We also got Notre Dame going up against Miami, Alabama going up against Florida State, and much more. One of the biggest week 1s we've had in a long time, and it's a great way to get started. But obviously, before we do anything, make sure if you're watching this video, not only do you watch it, but make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. The more subscribers we get, the more of these types of videos we could bring you guys, and the more entertainment that we could bring you in terms of football. Also, not only should you subscribe to this YouTube channel, but also make sure that you share and like this video. It helps with the algorithm, and if you're a football fan, you probably have some other friends or family that's also big football fans. So definitely make sure to share it to every single one of those. But like I said before, we got a lot to get into, so let's not waste any time. Let's get down to it. We had what was the biggest news outside of the football field. It broke probably one day after last week's video, so we weren't able to get to it last week, but we're for sure going to get to it this week. The SEC announced that they're going to be playing 9 conference games. Now, obviously, this was just bound to happen. You know, eventually, with other conferences doing this, the SEC now is going to be playing 9 conference games. Not only are they going to be doing that, but they're also going to be playing one big out-of-conference game as well. So now pretty much with as deep as the SEC is, there already wasn't no easy schedules in the SEC. I know everybody always talks about that one FCS game, but, the SEC already plays a lot of hard games. That's basically a game that they deserve when you play a really hard schedule against teams that are deep. We know the SEC is by far the deepest conference in college football. So with them now having to play 9 conference games and one probably decently challenging out-of-conference game, probably against another Power 4 conference foe, the SEC now, every team's going to have 10 other 12 games that are going to be very, very hard and demanding. Now, like I said, this was bound to happen. The SEC now should follow suit, and now we should have all the power conferences playing against these 9 conference games and also playing against one difficult out-of-conference game. Out of all these Power 4 conference teams, they should all have to, have somewhat of a similar strength of schedule. Now, I know not every conference is created equal, but this is the only way we could do it, where every team's playing, the same amount of in-conference games and at least one hard out-of-conference game. But when I look into this, I definitely think with the SEC going this route, now there's no questions on, them having, an easier route than everybody else. They already had the hardest route, in my opinion, and now it just got even that much harder. So what I want them to do, and what I want the committee and the people who are going to be voting and putting together the college football playoffs, they better for sure value strength of schedule. It would be a very disservice to the SEC, who's trying to do everything right, who is now going to be having very, very hard schedules, to now be demoted and be punished for and criticized if now they have, one extra win. Now, if these teams that are normally 10-2 are going to be going 9-3, they should not be punished. And we know playing 9 games in the SEC is not equivalent to playing 9 games in the Big Ten. I know we have 4 power conferences, but really 2 big super conferences in the Big Ten and the SEC. And yeah, playing 9 conference games in the Big Ten is much more difficult than playing 9 games in the ACC or playing 9 games in the Big 12. But the SEC playing 9 conference games is that much harder than the Big Ten. So think about how much more harder it is for the SEC than a conference like the Big 12 or the ACC, and now including the Big Ten. So the committee better look at strength of schedule when determining these teams. Because the way I look at it is that they're going to be playing these 9 conference games and this out-of-conference matchups, having 10 really hard games every single year. When they look at these records, they better look at a 9-3 SEC team the same way they look at a 10-2 Big Ten team. Because frankly, with this schedule and with these changes, going 9-3 in the SEC, in my opinion, is more impressive than going 10-2 in the Big Ten. We had a team like Indiana who made the playoffs last year, and yeah, they deserve it. But we know Indiana, if they would have played some of these schedules that the SECs had to do, who knows? Maybe this is a 7-5 or 8-4 team. And these teams in the SEC shouldn't be punished for it. I know the SEC hasn't won the national championship over the last 2 years, but we know their dominance. And we know, in a vacuum where you put these teams against each other, the SEC, usually does come on at top. And the SEC is the best division for a reason. There's a reason why the SEC year in and year out has more NFL players drafted each and every year. And why when we look at, NFL mock drafts head into the season or NFL draft rankings or All-Americans or whatever list you want to do to determine how talented these teams are, the SEC is by far and away better than the ACC and the Big 12, and I think that they're better than the Big 10 as well. The Big 10 obviously added the teams that they did from the Pac-12, obviously made them a much stronger conference, but the SEC added great teams as well with Oklahoma and also Texas, who's at the top of the conference now. So the SEC better get rewarded now for the fact that they have these hard schedules. I know we still don't know what the future is of the playoffs. Right now we have a 12-team playoffs. There's been discussion of it becoming a 14-team playoff, a discussion of it maybe even going up to 24-28. I don't want that many teams. I think if you move it to 24-28, I think that diminishes the regular season. And we know college football, any pro sport or collegiate sport, the college football has the best regular season. I think by making it 24-28, that diminishes that great regular season. I would ideally like it to be 14 to 16 teams and maybe even 20 teams at most. With kind of like what the NBA does with a sort of a playing tournament to get into the dance. At most, I would do 20, but I would actually prefer 16. And I would like, I'm against, automatic bids in terms of, if, 4 conference champions have to be in, because we know winning the Big 12 or winning the ACC is not equivalent to winning the Big 10 and the SEC. If you have a conference that completely implodes on itself, it is not a good conference, but you got one team that had an easy schedule and they go 11-1 in the Big 12. Why should they get in over a team that goes 9-3 in the ACC who just had a gauntlet, who had to go through teams like Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and Florida? It's really not fair to the SEC, and I think that's why, if they do want to go the automatic bid route, I would like for them to have, a certain amount of teams in each conference get in. Make it to where the SEC automatically gets 4 teams. Make it to where the Big 10 automatically gets 4 teams, and the ACC and the Big 12 get 2. That's really how we should break this down. If you really want to start going automatic bids and automatic qualifiers, if you want to give a conference champion from the Big 12 an automatic bid, well, then make sure that the top 4 teams from the SEC get in there, because the 4th best team in the SEC, majority of the time in most years, would beat the best team in the Big 12. So I think that's going to be the trade-off. We got to look at the SEC now and, not look at it as just, the Big 10 or the Big 12 or the ACC has 10, 11 win teams. That automatically makes them a better team, and they should get in over a 9-win team in the SEC. That's not fair. And we know that when they have this talent and when they get matched up in these playoff games, most of the time the SEC is one-sided. Now, I know at the top of the Big Ten, you got teams like Ohio State and others that can compete and beat some of these teams. But outside of the Ohio States of the world, the middle and the bottom of the Big Ten, is not nearly as good as the bottom of the SEC. In every given week, the worst team in the SEC, or maybe not the worst team, but one of the four worst teams in the SEC, could give probably the fifth or sixth team in the SEC a good run for their money. That's why we see upsets in the SEC every year, and that's why a team like Alabama could lose to a team like Oklahoma last year. So hopefully we get that, and hopefully the committee understands that playing in the SEC is unlike playing in any conference in college football. But now let's transition back to on the field. We got to talk about week 0. And what was the main marquee matchup that we previewed last week was Iowa State. Iowa State went up against Kansas State, two ranked teams, and it was a very, very good game, actually. It kind of went exactly how I predicted. I said it was going to be kind of low scoring, which it was, 24-21. It's kind of low scoring for a college football game. And I said it was going to come down to Iowa State and Rocco Beck making some big plays in the fourth quarter. So I kind of went the way I predicted, but some things obviously I didn't predict. A.V. Johnson had a really good game. I mean, he pretty much went tit for tat and, drive for drive with Rocco Beck, and they were pretty much equally as good. They both had 2 passing touchdowns, obviously had 2 touchdowns through the air, while also getting another touchdown on the ground. A.V. Johnson played really good in the second half and really tried to give this team the best chance of winning. When I look at how this game went, the big decider was the fourth downs. Iowa State was much better on fourth down than Kansas State was. Kansas State had a couple opportunities to, extend drives, but they weren't able to. Obviously, Iowa State was able to capitalize on their fourth down plays more. We also had some sloppy football due to the weather and maybe some, first game jitters, but probably due to the weather and the fact that, like I said, coming in this game, I expected both their defenses to play good. Iowa State, outside of a couple big plays and a couple collapses, they played pretty well. What really hurt Kansas State was losing Edwards, the running back, on the first, return. Obviously, he fumbled. You can't have a fumble, at the first time your team's touching the ball in the season. But then he was out for the rest of the game, and outside of A.V. Johnson and maybe a couple other, small run plays from their other backup running backs, Kansas State really couldn't get anything out their run. So it made Kansas State one-dimensional. And even with A.V. Johnson, who struggled with the passing game in last season, and Iowa State knowing that, A.V. Johnson was still able to make really good plays through the air and really, like I said, put this team on his back. Ultimately, it wasn't enough because Rocco Beck and Chase Hansen was able to really, flourish in the fourth quarter. Their other running back as well flourished in the first half, and then Chase Hansen came in the second half fresh and really made some big plays. I thought Marcus Neal for Iowa State was their best player defensively. The guy was making very important tackles, breaking up passes, and really helping Iowa State. So, the game went somewhat how I predicted. A lot of people had Kansas State winning this game. I thought Kansas State pass rush was very good. They were giving Rocco Beck in the first half fits, obviously causing some turnovers, but with both teams having multiple turnovers, it kind of negated itself. It was a great game to really start off week 0 and kind of was the precursor to what should be a lot of good games in week 1. And we got to start off with the biggest game, maybe potentially the biggest regular season game of the season. We have Texas. Number 1 ranked Texas is at number 3 Ohio State. Ohio State is favored by 2, as we record this, 2.5. Obviously, these lines could change as we get closer to the games. But either way, it may change by a point or 2. It ultimately won't change my prediction as well. So you could still take, this to the bank. With Texas, number 1 Texas going against number 3 Ohio State. This is something, you may see mid-season or at the end of the season, but they get basically 2, if not the top 2 teams. I know according to this, it's 2 of the top 3 teams, but 2 of the top teams in the country playing against each other in week 1. Obviously there's no preseason for these teams, so pretty much these teams got to be ready to roll week 1. You're not able to really have, any slow starts when you're playing in a game like this. And as a college football fan, you really can't ask for, anything better. You get Arch Manning. It won't be his first start, but his first start in terms of being, prepped as the full season starter. And he's going up against the first time in a first-year starter, redshirt freshman who did have a season last year where he got to develop and be on the bench. But now in his first start, Julian Sayin, former Elite 11 MVP, one of the top quarterback recruits to come out in the 2024 cycle, was originally at my favorite school, Alabama, and then transferred to Ohio State. I think that was a great decision for him. Quarterbacks, if you're a quarterback, why would you not want to play for Ohio State? You're always going to have great receivers, and right now, Ohio State may have the best receiver that they've ever had, the best player in all of college football, and Jeremiah Smith. You also got potential first-round pick in Cardinal Tate. Obviously, they got to replace some guys on the O-line, so we have to see how that's going to work out. But Arch Manning going up against Julian Sayin, two former five-star recruits that both have first-round NFL potential. I think obviously Arch Manning, because of his dual threat ability and his size, is the more talented quarterback. But Julian Sayin could be an elite pocket passer that with the right progression in his development could be one of the most efficient quarterbacks in college football. He could kind of be similar to what we saw C.J. Stroud was a couple years ago, where he was just able to read defenses, get the ball into the right guy's hands, and just be super dead accurate. I think obviously some matchups you got to look for is Jeremiah Smith, the best receiver and best player in college football, go up against that stingy Texas defense. Texas has so many great defensive players. They got great corners. They got one of the top edge rushers in Colin Simmons. They got one of the top linebackers, Anthony Hill. So we shall see what this offense with Julian Sayin. Your first start going up against this Texas defense is a lot to ask for. Obviously, Texas, they lost some offensive linemen. So we have to see how Arch Manning's going to do. But on the flip side, Ohio State lost a lot of their top defensive linemen as well. They lost Jack Sawyer, JT, and others. So we shall see how their offensive line, who has replaced a lot of starters who went to the NFL. But I feel like with Texas being young and having to replace guys in the offensive line, Ohio State having to do the same thing on the defensive line, and with Arch Manning's mobility and dual threat ability, I feel like that's kind of going to negate itself. So I know Ohio State's the favorite. They obviously will have the home field advantage. I think that's why this point spread is the way it is. If this was a neutral site game, Texas probably would be the favorite. I just think with Julian Sayin going up against this Texas defense, that's a lot to ask for. I expect a low-scoring game because of the fact that we're going to have two really good defenses and two quarterbacks who are still inexperienced at this juncture. I think in a low-scoring game, I think Texas, I trust their defense right now. I think Ohio State eventually, with some potential breakout players along the defensive line and linebacker position, could be a great defense. They also got some young corners as well with Sanchez and others that could break out. But right now, I'm going to have to go with Texas. I think Arch Manning's the better quarterback than Julian Sayin. And I think Texas's defense will be better this year and obviously in this game in Ohio State. So I'm going to go with Texas to win. It's kind of an upset since they're not the favorite, but with a -2, there's really no upsets in this one. So give me Texas to win this game in a low-scoring game. We will move on now to another game that won't be on Saturday. It will be on the next day because we have college football this week on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, kicking off the Labor Day weekend with college football. And it's great news for college football fans. We got Notre Dame, who was just in the national championship, going up against Miami. So number 6 Notre Dame right now as we do this is a 2.5 favorite at number 10 Miami. This is a really tough game to predict. With two new starting quarterbacks here. Obviously in Miami, Hurricanes bringing in Carson Beck, who is a new starting quarterback for them, but is a very experienced college quarterback. He had a few years on the bench developing in Georgia, and then ultimately had 2 years of starting at Georgia. So this is the 5th-year guy who's got plenty of experience. I think last year with the inconsistencies Georgia had at offensive line, it kind of hurt him. Carson Beck's the quarterback that needs to have protection. I think Miami is going to have a much more improved offensive line. I know Georgia also will have a much more improved offensive line compared to what they had last year. But comparing Miami to Georgia last year, I think Miami will have, a slightly better offensive line. Notre Dame's got a really solid pass rush, but they're not deep. So they're not going to be able to have that rotation, but they do got some guys like Young and others that they can rely on. But since they're not deep, I'm not sure what they're going to have in the tank as this game goes on. And when you don't have guys to supplement, unless they got some young guys we don't know about, which Notre Dame always has some breakout players, I don't think they have the depth at the pass rush to keep that rotation, very, very, obviously very healthy, while also keeping them very, very, energized and being able to keep up that stamina. On the Notre Dame side, they're going to have obviously one of the best secondaries. They had one of the best secondaries last year, and a lot of those guys return. They are going to be led by Leonard Moore, who was one of, if not the best corner last year as a true freshman, and now heads into this year as the best cornerback in college football. He's a future top 5 NFL draft pick, but thankfully for Notre Dame, he's only a sophomore, so we'll get to see him at Notre Dame for 2 more years. They also have some other great secondary players as well to go along with him, with Christian Gray. So I think that's a good matchup to look at. Miami's got some good young wide receivers, and I think Miami, who had a much young defense last year, now those guys like Ruben Bain and others are going to be experienced and now upperclassmen. So I think Miami's defense, who last year was a terrible defense, kind of basically ended the season when they expected Cam Ward to win these shootouts each and every week. Now they won't have to do that. They'll have a better offensive line to control the game. They'll have a much better defense. And I think with Notre Dame, with C.J. Carr, very talented quarterback, one of the top recruits, making his first start, I just think Miami having the home field advantage, having the more experienced quarterback, having an improved offensive line, having an improved defense, I think, again, this could be another low-scoring game. But I think Miami's better equipped to win that low-scoring game because of Carson Beck and because of the defense they have. I think Notre Dame obviously has the advantage in the secondary, but I think Miami's got the advantage along the pass rush and the defensive line. And I think in his first start, they can give C.J. Carr fits. I think C.J. Carr is going to be a great quarterback this season, and I think he could eventually be an NFL first-round pick. But I just think in this game, that's too much to ask. And even though they're ranked 6 and Miami's ranked 10 and they're the favorite, again, I'm going to pick the underdog here, and I'm going to go with Miami with that home field advantage and with Carson Beck being that experienced quarterback. I think that they will be able to do enough to come away with the win. And another big marquee matchup we have this weekend, we have number 9 LSU going up at number 4 Clemson. Clemson is obviously favored at home by 3.5. You know me, if you watch my previous video, I picked Clemson to not only win the ACC, but I also picked them to win the whole thing. I picked them to win the national championship. LSU, I do expect them to be a much improved team, and I think they finally do make the playoffs in the Brian Kelly era. LSU, they got so many young transfers and a lot of new players that we're going to have to see how they're going to gel. And I did go up against Clemson, who has so many returning players who know the system, know how to play with each other. You got Clay Klubnik, the top senior quarterback in college football, and he will be in the discussion for the Heisman and be in the discussion for the best quarterback in college football. Very experienced, improved every single year. So look for him to take an even another step above what was already one of the best quarterbacks in college football. He returns a lot of his top receivers, including Antonio Williams and others. So he's already got that chemistry built. They do got to replace their running back, but they got a young budding star freshman, so we shall see. And with Peter Woods and T.J. Parker, probably the best defensive tackle and one of the 3 best edge rushers, going up against an LSU offensive line who is going to be inexperienced. They lost some guys to the NFL draft. So I just think that's a bad recipe. Brian Kelly trying to finally win this big marquee season opener. We know he's kind of like on a losing streak with this and has lost the last couple season openers. He's obviously going to try to end that, that bad losing streak. We got Garrett Nussmeier, who, when kept, in check and when, given the time in the pocket and protected, He could dissect and light up any defense. He's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in college football, and he's a very experienced guy as well. Sat behind Jaden Daniels and now heading into his second year. I'm glad he decided to come back to college. I think he definitely needed development. I know he's a little on the smaller side, but so was Clay Klubnik. I think Clay Klubnik's got some more mobility and improvisation, and I just think he's just a better, more consistent, accurate quarterback. And I did Garrett Musmeyer behind LSU's questionable offensive line, going up against Peter Woods and TJ Parker, and going on the road. I just think that's a lot to ask for. So, I picked Clemson to win the national championship. I'm not going to change my mind now, especially if they win this. They're headed into the right direction. Even if Clemson doesn't win this game and LSU ends their losing streak and Brian Kelly comes up with a game plan and that offensive line plays good and all those new transfers just gel right in easily like a puzzle, I still think Clemson could rebound and end up still winning the ACC, which shouldn't be a deep conference. And once they get into the dance, I can see them going far into the playoffs and still winning. So win or lose, this doesn't change who I have as my national championship pick, but I'm going to go with Clemson to win and cover in this matchup. Now we get to my favorite game of the week, and that's my Alabama Crimson Tide, who is a 13.5-point favorite at the Florida State Seminoles. Thomas Castellanos, the new transfer quarterback for Florida State, is a huge upgrade over DJ Ongole. DJ Ongole was the guy who had potential, but really fell off a year ago and really put this team behind the eight ball. Every single time the offense went on the field, and his backups didn't really help much. So you get a dual threat quarterback like Thomas Castellanos, who really at this point in juncture, unless he takes the next step as a passer, is a much better runner than he is a passer. But I'm going to say this. He gave Alabama a lot of bulletin board material with a lot of the stuff that he did say, kind of coming at Alabama. And I think Alabama's going to make him pay for that. Ty Simpson making his not his first start, but again, like we said with Arch Manning, Ty Simpson's making his first start where he's pretty much been developed and prepared as the starter throughout the preseason. Now, I know he had a competition with the super uber talented Keelan Russell and Austin Mack, but we knew that with his experience being, the fourth-year junior, the 22, 23-year-old, we knew Ty Simpson was going to have to get his opportunity to start. I think Florida State's going to be much better this year. Not only are they going to be better at quarterback, but they got a really good receiver in Deuce Robinson, who's 6'4", 6'5", can run really fast, and has NFL first-round potential. Now, he hasn't been able to put that together. That's why he lost, playing time and lost, ultimately his starts at USC. So he was a guy that looked at as a first-round pick, but because of the fact that he hasn't developed like some people thought, it's kind of on the outside looking in. I think this could be a potential breakout year. He's 20 years old, so he's a very young guy who is right at the perfect time to break out. Most college football players do break out at 20, 21 years old at the college level. So I think this is a perfect year at Florida State, who's going to have to rely on him heavily for him to break out. They obviously are going to be much better on defense with Jackson at the defensive line returning. They bring in some transfers, including Wilson, who is going to be one of the top corners in the ACC. So their defense will be better, more consistent. Their offensive line will still be good. Their quarterback play is going to be significantly better. That's the biggest, difference between this year and last year. Alabama is going to go into this game with some injuries, some important injuries actually at that. Jam Miller, the running back, won't be able to play until they get into SEC play. They obviously will probably be without Jaden Roberts. They're one of their top guards. And Alabama is supposed to have one of the top offensive linemen. They still got four other good players along the offensive line, but the fact that they're not going to have their top back, their top guard, we got to question how good is Alabama going to be able to run the ball and what's expected to be a really good defensive line at Florida State. I just think, like what I said last week in the previous video, Bama's secondary is just going to be way too good with Zabian Brown, the depth that they have at corner, with Hubbard and Keon Sabb at the safety position, and they're going up against a quarterback who can struggle at throwing the ball. I just think that's a bad recipe. and I expect Alabama to win. That is a lot of points to give up on the road, especially when they may struggle at run the ball with Ty Simpson, who's inexperienced. Yes, he's older, but he's still kind of an inexperienced quarterback who doesn't have a lot of playing time. So I'm going to go Alabama to win, but Alabama no cover. So Alabama, I think they're going to win the game, but I would take Florida State with the points. Now we transition to another game that's going to be premiering before Saturday. One of these great games that we get before we get to the Saturday matchup. And that's going to be Georgia Tech, who's a 4.5-point favorite against Deion Sanders' Colorado Buffaloes. Obviously, this is Colorado's first season with Deion Sanders without Travis Hunter, without Shedeur Sanders, and without Shiloh. Georgia Tech was one of the hottest teams last year at the end of the year. They obviously opened up beating Florida State in an upset week 0, I should say, but it was their first game. And then they ended the season really hot. They did almost beat Georgia in that crazy millionth overtime that just kept going from overtime to overtime that was never ending, and they almost won that game. So Georgia Tech brings back a lot of their players. They bring back Haynes King, who's one of the top college quarterbacks. He doesn't really fit the NFL, but he'll be one of the top college quarterbacks. Feels like he's been in college forever. I think this will be his 6th season. So he's obviously as experienced as they get. They have plenty of players returning, including their running backs. They got a lot of great players on defense as well. So I think this is what could be built up to be one of the best Georgia Tech teams we've seen in quite some time. Obviously, as I stated before, Colorado, no Travis Hunter. He was the heart and soul of that team. He was the guy who helped his team on both sides of the ball, was their top defensive player, was their top offensive player. He was the Heisman Trophy winner for a reason. So losing him is obviously going to always be tough to replace. They got Keon Slater and Juju Lewis competing to be the starter. I think, Slater being the older, more experienced guy, and Juju Lewis, who reclassified, should still be in high school, who's still 17, about to turn 18, I think in September. I think he would be better suited spending a year on the bench developing, and then Slater should get the start. I expect Colorado, even with the loss of Travis Hunter, to have the best defense they've had in the Deion Sanders era. They got so many great assistant coaches, and you got McKinney, who's going to be, an all-conference player in the Big 12. He's a top 100 potential draft pick. He's a great defensive back who can move around and be very versatile. So I expect him to be really well. They have a very, very deep pass rush in Colorado this year who showed that deep pass rush last year, and all those guys pretty much returned. And then obviously they have a much better offensive line led by Jordan Seaton, who was one of the top freshman offensive linemen last year. So, they have him for another 2 years, and I expect him to be a top NFL draft pick when he comes out. So whoever quarterback does play for Colorado will get much better protection. I just think Georgia Tech is just too experienced, and I just think that they have too many good players that are returning. Colorado's got a lot of pieces to replace. I expect Colorado to take a step back this year compared to last year. I still think that they'll be a bowl-eligible team, but I expect them to take a step back this year to ultimately take 2 steps forward in 2026. Where Georgia Tech, this is the year where they're supposed to take 2 steps forward. So I expect Georgia Tech to be too much for them, and I expect Georgia Tech to win this game and also cover the points. Then we move into another coach, high market coach, actually making his season debut, and that's going to be Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick makes his collegiate college debut at home, going up against TCU. So we got TCU, who right now, as we stand and record this, is a 3-point favorite against North Carolina. So the Bill Belichick era starts. But North Carolina, I can't really say a lot about them because they're a complete unknown. They got, I think, 40 transfers on this team. We don't know how that's going to work out. And we got to see how, the players that they bring in, are they good? Are they not? Is Bill Belichick going to have the patience to coach these guys up? When you look at TCU, they return one of the top quarterbacks in the Big 12 in Josh Huber, who's a very accurate quarterback that can get the ball to his receivers. He has a little bit of mobility, but he's really good at getting the ball to his playmakers and being accurate and efficient. Now with him entering his second year as the starter, I look for him to take the next step as well. Obviously, TCU always has good pass catchers, so I expect them to have some good receivers for Josh Huber. I know they lost their top 2 receivers to the NFL draft, but TCU seems to reload. Maybe they are not as good as what they lost last year with Beck and Williams, but I expect their pass rushers to still be serviceable. And until I see what North Carolina team looks like, we don't know what their quarterback position is going to be. It probably is going to be Gio Lopez, but he's an unknown, playing at the Power 4 conference level. And with all these transfers that left and came in, until I see it on the field, I can't trust North Carolina and Bill Belichick, especially going up against a team like TCU, who should have a really good defense. They got some returning players in the secondary and in the D-line as well, and with their returning quarterback. I got to go TCU until I see something out of this North Carolina team and see what players emerge from Bill Belichick. I do think, he will, transition and change a little bit and have more patience with these, 18 to 23-year-olds, more so than what he had in the NFL. But I just think right now, until I see it, I got to trust TCU. So I'm going to go TCU to win the game and cover as well. Now we go to a neutral site game. We have a ACC team in Virginia Tech versus number 13th ranked South Carolina. South Carolina is an 8-point favorite. South Carolina right now has probably three of the more talented players in all of college football. Lenore Sellers is in the conversation for the most talented quarterback. The guy's over 6'4", 230 pounds, could run really, really well. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up running a 4.5, 4.6 when he goes to the NFL and goes to the combine. And then if you look at his progression as a passer as the season went last year, if he takes the next step, this is a guy who could be a much better version of Anthony Richardson. And we know when Anthony Richardson at certain points was able to put some things together, he was almost unstoppable. Now his inconsistencies as a passer is kind of what has limited him in the NFL. But there were certain games like that Utah game where when Anthony Richardson put it all together, he was the best player on the football field. And I can see Lenore Sellers being an Anthony Richardson type prospect that does able to put everything together. He's still very young. The guy was born in 2005, and he's still just 19 years old or just about to turn 20 years old. So even though he's, came in as an 18-year-old freshman, he kind of started the season as a 17-year-old, which is why he got redshirted. Then last year, he started off as an 18-year-old, turned 19 during the season. And now this year, heading into his redshirt sophomore season, his third year, he's a 19-year-old going into his 28th season. So this is a guy who's got tremendous, room for growth, and I expect him to take that next step. I said that South Carolina's got three of the most talented players. The other two was Dylan Stewart. He's one of the top defensive linemen in all of college football. He was a huge recruit, and if he was able to go to the NFL as a freshman last season, he probably would have been a top 10 pick. Now, the NFL forces players to go to college for 3 years, so we get 2 more years out of Dylan Stewart at the college level, but look for him to be one of the best D-line pass rushers in college football. He's big, fast, and strong as well. And another guy that's also big, fast, and strong is the wide receiver. We got Nick Harbor, who's 6'4", 6'5", and he's a track star. So he's a guy who's not only tall, but he's probably running 20 miles an hour plus and will probably light up the combine when he does go there and may hit a 4.3, 4.4. So between those three guys, I know they're going to need some players around them. We know South Carolina's got some other good defensive players. We got to see how their offensive line gels. We got to see how their running backs gel. They got a transfer coming in, so we got to see if he could give them a good spark as well. But with those three guys, those three guys are going to really be able to carry this team. And we know South Carolina just missed the playoffs last year, and they were one of the hottest teams as well. So look for them to continue that. I know this is a neutral site game. Let's give Virginia Tech a slight, chance in this game. Kylan Jones, one of the better dual threat quarterbacks in the ACC returning. That gives them a nice spark. He should be a top 8 quarterback in the ACC. He can run and throw. They got a great transfer running back with Stewart. They got some reliable receivers as well with Green. But I just think Virginia Tech is just going to be way too young and inexperienced on defense, and just doesn't have the depth to knock off a team like South Carolina. So with obviously it being a neutral site game, thank God it's not in South Carolina, or the point spread would probably be, in the double digits and maybe even double this. I look for South Carolina to win this game and still cover. Now we go to another matchup that we'll see before Saturday, and that's Auburn. Auburn is a -2 favorite against Baylor. Obviously, we got a new quarterback at Auburn in Jackson Arnold. Jackson Arnold was a former top recruit. He did, struggle last year, but he obviously, I think, lost his confidence. When you have all your receivers get hurt, your offensive line can't block for you at all, of course you're going to struggle and lose your confidence as a young quarterback. And the fact that, they expected him to take the next step, and it was kind of like his first year as the starter last year. Confidence is a huge key for a young quarterback like that. And when all your top receivers are hurt, you're not getting any protection, you're going to lose some confidence. So Auburn's going to want, Jackson Arnold to get on, a fast start to build that confidence back up. We know he's got the arm talent to, make that next step and be one of the top quarterbacks in the ACC. He's going to have some great players around him. Auburn is, super, super talented and littered with so many great young players. We know Cam Coleman was one of the top receivers coming out of high school, and him and his one-handed catches and his route running, everything he could do, he looks like he's already one of the top receivers in college football as a 19-year-old sophomore. We got Falk, coming back this year. This would be his third season, and he's already being considered as a top 10 NFL draft pick. Had he been able to come out last year, he would have been a first-rounder. So he was one of the top sack artists in the SEC as a 19-year-old sophomore last year. So now as a 20-year-old junior, looking for him to take the next step. You got Lee, who's one of the top corners in the SEC, returning as well. He's a top 100 pick as well. So this team just has so many great players. They got 3 all-conference caliber players along the offensive line. So we know Auburn should have the advantage on defense, O-line, and receiver. But Baylor probably will have the advantage at quarterback. I think Sawyer Robinson was one of the top quarterbacks in the Big 12, and Baylor was the team that finished on a really hot winning streak last year. And they were a team in the Big 12 that you did not want to play at the end of the year. And with them returning Sawyer Robinson, he's probably a late-round NFL draft pick. But even as a late-round NFL draft quarterback, with the quarterback position being so valuable, even if you're a 6th, 7th round guy, you're probably going to be one of the top quarterbacks in all of college football. They bring back Washington at running back, who, is kind of flying under the radar, even though he had a good season last year. I expect him to not be under the radar anymore. I expect him to be one of the breakout stars. Baylor does have the home field advantage, which obviously, definitely helps quite a bit. But even though they probably have the quarterback and running back, edge, and probably the coaching edge, I think Dave Aranda is one of the top, coaches in the conference. And I think at this point, I got more faith in Dave than I do in Hugh Freeze, who is still trying to show what he can do at Auburn. I just think Auburn is just way too talented, and I think this is the year where Auburn takes the next step. Well, they better sure, because if they don't, I think Hugh Freeze will be out of there. But I think this is the year that they were building on. I think last year they knew they were going to have their growing pains. I think this is the year that maybe not to make the playoffs, but this is the year for them to get to that 7-8 win mark and prove that their talent is not just talent, but players that could actually win games on the football field. And it should come down to how well Jackson Arnold plays and how well Hugh Freeze can coach these guys. But as good as I think Sawyer Robinson and Washington is, and Dave Aranda at coach, I just think Auburn is just way too talented. So, and they got way too many NFL bodies. And with this small of a point spread, even going on the road for a young team is a lot to ask for. I just think Auburn is just going to be too talented. And I think I'm going to have Auburn not only to win, but to cover the point spread as well. We also got another big matchup out of conference. We got Syracuse, who was one of the surprise teams last year, going up against number 24 Tennessee. Tennessee is a huge favorite. This will be another neutral site game. But Tennessee, a huge, basically 2-touchdown favorite, with them being a 13.5-point favorite. Obviously, the storyline in this, you have to mention it, is Tennessee losing Nico Iamaleava. He transferred to UCLA, and it's pretty much like they traded quarterbacks because the UCLA transfer, Joey Aguilar, is transferred to them. He's not nearly as talented as Nico, but he's definitely serviceable, and I definitely think he's a quarterback that, if everything around him is clean, I definitely think he can manage the game well. Syracuse lost a lot of players, not only to the draft, but to the transfer portal. They lost some their top pass catchers. They lost their quarterback as well. I think, Syracuse, who's got a transfer quarterback as well from Notre Dame, Steve Angelia, he was a guy who was thought to be maybe a future starter at Notre Dame, but I think he saw the writing on the wall with C.J. Carr being as talented as he is. I think he knew he probably wasn't going to be able to start, so he transferred to a school where he knew he'd probably be able to win the starting job, and he definitely did. But right now, I just think, he's an unknown. We shall see what he is, but he's an unknown right now as a Power 4 caliber starting quarterback. I think with Tennessee, we've seen what Aguilar could possibly do. I think he can be serviceable. Syracuse also brings in, a former top recruit in Jonte Cook, who was with Texas, who thought maybe he could be an impact player. But we know with Texas, with Matthew Golden and Wingo and all these other NFL draft players, he wasn't able to see the field and get playing time. So he transfers to Syracuse, and rightfully so. He'll come right in, should be their go-to guy, and I expect him to show that NFL potential and be able to break out as well. He'll be able to get more playing time, and Syracuse is going to have to rely on him heavily. Another player I want to mention for Syracuse is Demetrius Samuel Jr. This guy has to, is thought to be maybe a starting cornerback this season for Syracuse, and he wasn't a guy that a lot of people were really talking about, coming out of high school, but he for sure is showing what he could do. He's thought to be maybe their number one corner this year, and he's only 17 years old. The kid is born in 2008, reclassified, and even with him being born in 2008 as a 17-year-old, he can end up being Syracuse's top defensive back. He basically might end up being this year's version of Ryan Williams at the cornerback position. But when you look at Tennessee, with Jaron McCoy, who's probably the top cornerback, in the NFL draft coming up, probably the second best cornerback in all of college football behind the sophomore Leonard Moore. And he's thought to be a top 10 NFL pick who a lot of people have, maybe he might be the consensus top cornerback in the NFL draft in 2026. They also got a lot of other great pass rushers like Josephs, some other great D linemen as well. So Tennessee is going to have one of the best defenses again. They obviously got to replace some good, talented wide receivers and Dylan Sampson, their top player on offense. But they got some guys in there with Josh Heupel, who's really good with quarterbacks and really good with offensive players. I expect him to be able to find some guys that can come in and be serviceable and really be able to make enough plays to where that defense, they can rely on their defense to make great plays and lead them and have their offense, not pushing behind the 8 ball. I love Syracuse's head coach, Fran Brown, who really showed last year why he could be one of the top coaches in the ACC, and I think he'll be able to develop a good game plan to keep this game close. But I just think Tennessee is just way too talented, and I think Aguilar will be able to manage the game. I think it being a neutral site game and not being at Tennessee, which is one of the top hardest places to play, I think that gives Syracuse a slight chance, and I think Fran Brown will be able to develop a good game plan as well. But I still think Tennessee is going to win the game. Their defense is just going to be way too much for their offense to overcome. But, man, that's a lot of points to give up. So at this point of juncture, I'm going to go with Tennessee to win, but Tennessee with no cover. Now when we go to the last couple matchups, speaking of the team that Nico Iamaleava left Tennessee for, that is UCLA. We got Utah, who's a 6-point favorite at UCLA. Nico Iamaleava is back in his hometown, playing for UCLA. Now, Nico Iamaleava won't have the coaching. No disrespect to UCLA's head coach, but he won't have the coaching and he won't have the talent on the offense that he would have had at Tennessee. But with the talent that Nico Iamaleava possesses himself, being a guy who, he's a little on the thin side, but he's very tall. He's got supreme arm talent, can make all the throws in the book. He's super mobile. I think he's a guy who has so much talent, he could uplift this program. Now, that's going to be a lot to ask for a young quarterback who, still, he did start last year, but we got to see some of those growing pains. And he's a guy who's going to be, I think, a redshirt sophomore. I think he did redshirt his first year. I don't think he played enough games to count as his freshman year. So he's a guy who's heading into his third season, but has only really had one true year as a starter. So I think to ask him to uplift the program at this point is real tough. I think eventually he will uplift them and, show why he has, potential to be a top 10 NFL draft pick and compete to be one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL draft. But I think he's more better suited as a 2027 NFL pick than he is a 2026 NFL draft pick. I think Utah, who struggled last year, is going to be much better. They got Damper at quarterback, who should be much better. They lost their starter last year due to injury in Cam Rising. And with Wilson, the young guy, and others, they weren't able to get serviceable quarterback play. I think Damper, who was one of the top group of 5 quarterbacks last year, will come in and be, a very good dual threat quarterback and maybe a potential top 10 quarterback in the Big 12. And with all these great quarterbacks returning in the Big 12, I think if you could be a top 10 quarterback in that conference this year, that's saying a lot. They're going to probably have the best offensive line, Utah will, in the Big 12. They got 2 first-round talents along that offensive line. Spencer Fano is the guy who you see in the conversation as one of the top tackles that's going to be drafted next year. And then they got Kaba Lamu, who's a first-round guy as well. So they're going to be able to lead on the offensive line to make it much easier for the transfer quarterback. They do need some guys to break out along the receiver position and running back position, but they're also going to have a very aggressive defense as well. And I think with that offensive line and that defense, with what this team in Utah can be able to do along the trenches, that's just going to be way too much in Nico Iamaleava's first start for them to overcome as well. So I expect Utah to have a really good season, be one of those teams competing to be one of the top 4 or 5 teams in the Big 12. And I expect Utah to win this game and cover. Now we have one final game to break down, and that is another neutral site game, and that's going to be Nebraska. Nebraska's a 6.5-point favorite going up against the Cincinnati Bearcats. Nebraska, is this going to be finally their breakout year for them and Matt Rule? Even the coaches before they had Matt Rule, we kept expecting them to break out. They've always brought in good players, and we're always like, is this the year? Is this the year? And then when you get Matt Rule, you get Dylan Raiola, who is pretty much looks like a carbon copy who like Pat Mahomes. And, he says, oh, I'm my own guy. Well, you say that you're your own guy, but yet you do the same haircut as Pat Mahomes. You wear the same number as Pat Mahomes. You throw just like him. You mentioned that he's your idol. I don't see how you can say you're trying to be your own guy when you're literally emulating the same guy. But he does throw a lot like Pat Mahomes. He does a lot of those improvisation. He does a lot of those side throws. But he's a guy who had his inconsistencies last year, but he was a 19-year-old freshman, so he should have his growing pains. But he is super, uber talented, and he is a guy who wouldn't surprise me if at some point down the line is the first overall pick in the NFL if everything goes right. So I expect Nebraska for this to be the year. If it's not this year, then when would it be? Obviously you could always say, oh, maybe when Dylan Raiola is draft eligible in 2026, maybe that's their year, but I feel like 2025 has to be Nebraska's breakout year. They finally are going to have some better offensive line play. They should have, obviously, a really strong defense again, and they should have some breakout players at the receiver position. They haven't had superstar guys at the receiver position, and everything you hear out of camp from them and so far during their preseason has been that they've been having some good pass rushers that are going to break out. So I think hearing that makes me more confident in Nebraska being able to break out and being able to help in Dylan Raiola's development. Cincinnati has an experienced quarterback coming back in Sorsby, who I believe is a 4th or 5th year senior. They also got a real shifty, talented running back in Walker. They got some solid tight end play. They're going to have some all-conference caliber O-line to give them some good protection. On defense, they have one of the top defensive linemen in all of college football, in Corleone. He could stuff the run. He could rush the passer. And he's been a guy who's been, mocked to go in the 2nd, 3rd round the last couple of years. Now he's heading into his final season of college football, and I expect him to emerge and be one of the top defensive linemen in all of college football. Obviously, this being a neutral site game that affects the point spread as well. Nebraska doesn't have to go on the road, and vice versa. The Bearcats doesn't have to go on the road as well. But again, I just think that Dylan Raiola is going to establish himself as one of the top quarterbacks in the country. He's going to show that potential that he had coming out of high school. And I think Matt Rule, who's had success in college before he went and failed in the NFL, is going to prove why he was one of the top coaches once before and why he still is one of the top coaches in college football. So I expect Nebraska to win and cover the points against the Cincinnati Bearcats. So that's going to do it for this episode. Obviously, we had a lot of games to break down week one. We usually do get a lot of great games. So definitely make sure to stay tuned. We obviously are going to be coming back next week. We have all these great games. So you know what that means. We're going to have a lot of great games to react to. So everything that happens in week one, we're going to be breaking it down. We're also going to be previewing, obviously, all the big matchups that are going to be happening in week two, and we're going to be bringing you this every single week. But obviously, make sure if you're watching this video, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel. It helps. The more subscribers I have, the more time I can spend on this, and the better and more videos I can bring you guys. Not only should you subscribe, but make sure to like this video and make sure to share it with anybody else. If you're watching this and you're a football fan, I bet you have other friends that are football fans or family members that are college football fans as well. So definitely make sure to share them in the video. If not only if you're a college football fan, if you're an NFL fan, you should subscribe to the channel as well, because we're going to be bringing you NFL videos starting this week as well. We're going to be previewing the NFL season, and then obviously each week we're going to be breaking down every single NFL matchup, giving you the point spreads and what are some of the best bets that you could do. So definitely make sure to stay tuned for that. It was a great show. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll for sure catch you guys next week. Enjoy the college football season and enjoy week one. We have a lot of great matchups to watch, so make sure to stay tuned.